Survivor's Guide to True Crime includes discussions of sexually based violence and is not intended for children. Information provided should not be used as a substitute for professional medical or legal advice. Please exercise discretion and self-care. Welcome back to Survivor's Guide to True Crime. I'm Kim.
And I'm Kara. And these are our radio voices. I was laughing because right before we pressed record, we were having a normal conversation in just our normal voices. And then the second we press record, Kim's like, I'm Kim. Totally different voice.
I don't know if I can do it when we're actually recording, but my normal, just conversational voice is very slack-jawed. Okay. Okay, what are we going to do?
Well, that's like your multitasking. That's like your multitasking voice.
Yeah.
It's not your normal voice. This is your normal voice.
I don't know. I'm constantly multitasking.
I mean, ADHD much. Yeah. I mean, really, this is kind of almost always my voice when I talk to you because you make me happy.
Oh, that's true.
But your voice doesn't sound like that when I talk to you. So
that's rude. Because I am comfortable enough to just be my my garbage human self.
You're such an a-hole. God, Kim.
80%. Okay.
Yeah.
I am really excited to be, number one, recording because we're both upright and happy. It's going into a holiday weekend. If you're listening to this on the day that it drops, this is July 5th, which means we are through the barbecues and holidays and only a couple days away from our Queen Taylor's dropping of the Speak Now Taylor's version. I'm sure that that's marked on all of your calendars, just like,
oh my God. No, but you know what is marked on our whole family calendar? The fact that Indiana Jones comes out today.
Okay, yes. I am so excited for that. Did you see something about, like, did they use some kind of anti-aging?
CGI?
Yeah, for the technology to show him when he's younger?
Oh, man. Yes. So I saw this video of Harrison Ford and they were talking about how they basically did the CGI anti-aging thing. Because I guess there's some clips that are basically new content that is filmed for this new movie. And they were like, how did they do that? He said, well, the studio owns hundreds and hundreds of hours of me. And so they basically just had AI analyze all of that video content they had so that it could map his mannerisms and everything, kind of overlay that over him now. Mm-hmm. It's insane. I think it's so cool.
Well, and he was talking about the ethicality behind it and everything. And like, how do you feel about using the AI anti-aging stuff? And he's like, well, it's me and we're recording it for my character.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, if they were doing it in reverse where it's going forward, no one would say anything about it.
Yeah, but it's also like, let's look at the guidelines of ethics. Like they have his consent. Mm-hmm. Like he's benefiting monetarily for it from it, so I say ethically it's fine for that. But we know that there are issues with deep fakes on the web where people can take anyone's face, anyone who has a plethora of like you or I. Mm-hmm. We have plenty of videos out there of us, so someone could literally take our face and put it on a deep fake. So like we already know that this technology exists, and we know, I actually saw something yesterday. There's this big TikTok conference, VidCon, and they had like all of the executives from TikTok and TikTok China there, and they basically were saying that TikTok in China is 5 years ahead of us right now. And they were like, so all of the technology that you guys have on TikTok, China is 5 years ahead, and then development is 5 years ahead of that. And they were like, so you have no idea what's coming. So like the technology is developing rapidly at this point. I think there are definitely gigantic ethical issues that we will see that'll be brand new to our generation. And yeah, it's just tricky.
Well, the biggest thing that kept coming up for me that I was thinking of when the deepfakes were really coming to prominence is with child images being used in sexually explicit ways. And that's happening. What are our laws going to do to catch up with that? And how are they going to be prosecuted?
Right.
And held accountable for creating CSAM?
Yeah, right? I mean, it's so tricky. And I don't know what the answer is, but I will tell you that if you ever see a deep fake of me, I've never recorded anything. So just know that that's fake.
But how are you going to know? Like that's the whole problem, right? Like how do you know it's a deep fake unless that person is telling you that's not me? And then you get into the Shaggy defense. Wasn't me. That I saw you on the cam.
Right.
Wasn't me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think anytime you see anything with a celebrity or influencer from this point going on, I would say just assume it's not real.
No.
I mean, let's take the United States defense here, like innocent until proven guilty. Just like, it just makes me so sad.
I know.
So, in other news, I got a text message yesterday from my producer for the movie and the documentary. And he said, I'm sure you already know this, but on TikTok, 244 million views related to posts about our movie.
What?
Isn't that insane?
That's wild.
There are currently, as of yesterday, the hashtag the girl who escaped has 200 and I think it was 25 million tags.
Stop.
Isn't that crazy?
That's incredible.
And the Kara Robinson story has like 64 million or something like that. And I'm like, goodness. No wonder I'm still getting people. I'm getting hits literally every day. Brand new followers, new hits, new questions. I mean, it's literally all the same questions. And I just...
Yep.
But yeah, I thought that was an insane number that my brain cannot possibly comprehend.
That's amazing, though. Congratulations. That's good.
Thanks. I mean,
that's a lot of awareness.
I know. And here we are in June and the movie premiered in February. So it's crazy that people are still finding it. People are still like tagging it. People are still making videos with it. It's still relevant.
Yeah. Well, and I open up my on demand for just our normal cable and it'll pop up. I'm like, oh, I know her. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. So
on my side of things right now, it's mostly just gearing up because everybody in the university school systems are getting back to work. They are planning out their budgets for fall semester, spring semester. And so I'm getting some different campuses, all of these different administrators and students who have been reaching out to plan out these speeches. So I'm really excited because my fall is starting to fill up, but still taking a few more. So if you or someone you know wants to have me out on campus, we're doing that. We can't announce our thing in August yet, can we?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, let's do this then. And so on top of those fall speeches, Kara and I get to be together in August, but we can't tell you why yet.
Yeah, it's a thing that has to do with the podcast, but it hasn't officially been announced. So I don't know if we can announce it.
Not yet.
But if you're in the mountain time zone and you like us, you might be able to see us at the same time.
Yeah, so we get to be together a couple different times actually in the upcoming months, which is super exciting. And our kids get to be together. Mine are real happy about this.
I know. Mine are, my kids have a hard time focusing beyond what's right in front of them, which is like paradise. We live in paradise. But we imagine that by the time we get back from our trip out west to come to Colorado and several other places along the way, that we will be on our land. That is the goal. So... it's kind of like paradise lost for them. Like they're like, wait, we're leaving and we're never coming back. So for them, it's a little bit of like a sadness.
Yeah, bittersweet.
Yeah, they'll be so happy. They'll have so much fun. They always do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about our amazing guest today. I loved this conversation.
Yes,
it's different from what we've done in the past too.
Yeah, it is. And this is something that we've wanted to do is bring on more experts. So, I feel like Mike was kind of that. We've had a couple of, Dr. Bailey obviously was an expert, but we've always had the goal of involving more experts in their field and that relate to being a survivor on the podcast. And so this is one of those cases.
Now, this was an expert that you sent me via Instagram a while back, and I was instantly hooked because her content was so engaging and right in line with the things that we talk about all the time. But it was very obvious we also still have plenty to learn from her too.
Yeah, it was a really fun conversation. So our guest today is Summer Forlenza. She's a trauma therapist and mental health educator who wants to help the world to become a more curious, compassionate, and connected place. Summer has a master's in clinical psychology from Pepperdine University and is a California licensed marriage and family therapist.
She specializes in treating post-traumatic stress disorder and helping survivors recover from the impact of both developmental and complex trauma. She received EMDR training in 2017 and has sought out additional advanced trainings and consultation on topics including flash technique, integrating EMDR with internal family systems therapy, working with dissociation, and eating disorder recovery.
She's also worked in a school setting, community mental health clinic, and residential and partial hospitalization level of care and eating disorder treatment. All right, here's our conversation with Summer.
Well, welcome, Summer.
Hello.
We're so excited that you're here today and you're catching us in our very authentic form. So
here for it.
So we start all of our episodes with an icebreaker. Tell us, what is the last thing that you binged? So a podcast or an audiobook or a TV show, whatever that is for you.
Last thing I binged was The Ultimatum Queer Love on Netflix.
Oh.
I binged that. Yeah.
Netflix, their dating reality shows are kind of superior. Like you can't look away from them. Listen, Kim knows I go hard for Love is Blind.
Yes.
It's so good. I can't explain it. I just can't look away.
The concepts are so unhinged that I can't believe that they get people to participate. And I'm just like watching this, like, what? This is like horrible and I can't look away.
Okay. Did you watch was it Love Match?
No.
You should probably watch that. It's on Netflix too, but it has like people from their various dating reality shows that come together in one place and they cross date. And they try to find their perfect match. Perfect match. That's what it is.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes, I did. Of course.
So ridiculous.
So messy.
Oh, it's so messy. On the other hand, Kim's like, you should watch, what's the show that you told me to watch? The Diplomat? I'm like, oh, I
like production quality, really, really good. But I also like Napoleon Dynamite. So, I think I enjoy scripted more because I like the thought that goes into it. Not that there isn't with reality TV, but it's just, I can't relax because I'm like, those are real people just walking around in the world. However, one of the best, quote unquote, unscripted, Jury Duty. Have you guys watched this?
Yeah.
Yes.
So
okay.
Obsessed. Okay. Yes. I saw that it was going to be coming out and I watched all the previews and I was showing my husband, Mike, who's a prosecutor. I'm like, oh, we have to watch this. He's like, I don't know. It's the creators of The Office. There's no way that it's not amazing. And it was. And it was like surprisingly heartfelt and wonderful.
I know.
Freaking hilarious.
I was straight up a little concerned for his like psychological well-being when they shared it with him though. I was like, that would really mess my brain up to be like 3 weeks. I'm like in the Truman Show. What's happening? But he seemed to take it okay. He seemed okay.
The interviews that he's done since then were like, I had a few moments where I'm like, am I still being filmed? And it was James Marsden that called him. He's like, no, I promise that this is not, but the relationships that you made are very real. And it's like, but yeah, man, talk about media-based drama.
Did they talk about how they found him? Like, did his friends and family recommend him for it?
No, he had applied through a Craigslist ad like over a year before, and it was for a jury-based documentary, but then he thought he got the actual summons. And so he thought that he was going through it. So like there were, what did they say, 40,000.
Like, how did they find such a good
40,000 applicants. What does that tell you too? Like, there's no way that guys like that really exist in the wild.
Right.
I heard he was like on YouTube or something, that he's like used to being on camera. I don't know if that's what I saw. So.
Either way, he was hilarious. And I think the part that was most interesting for me was the end when they're showing how they scripted all this and they had pre-written the jokes. And so there were all these different directions. It was like a choose your own adventure, but everybody's in on it. And it was so cool. I don't know how they ever replicate it or what they do, but I loved it.
Yeah, I thought the end was really cool too. Okay, so that's our icebreaker that just kind of gets all the awkwardness out and also just like...
Just kidding, we have infinite awkwardness.
We get super real really fast. I don't know, I think everybody gives pretty interesting answers. So first of all, tell us who you are, what you do, and how you got to be there.
Yeah. So my name is Summer Forlenza. I'm a licensed therapist in California. I have a private practice where I work with individual clients. I also have a group that I run. And I got here because I went through a bunch of my own stuff and really wanted to understand better, like how healing worked. Like I literally went to grad school because I wanted to understand trauma and trauma recovery. And so I came in like knowing that that's what I was going to focus on and specialize in. And I got some specialized trainings like really early on in EMDR therapy and have been like very focused on this ever since.
Have you seen those memes that have gone around Instagram that are like, were you really interested in psychology as a major or do you just have trauma?
Who put that picture of me on the internet?
We're both psychology majors. So,
you know, out of all the coping skills you can have, it's not a bad one.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Man, abnormal psych was my favorite class. I'm like, it was just so interesting. And I'm like, why? Why is that so interesting to me?
I understand myself so much better now.
Right. And how does that make you feel?
I know. I will never forget the moment. I think of this at least once a week where I was sitting in abnormal psych class and the professor, which I think was pretty profound at the time, she said, basically the DSM and this whole label of abnormal psych, it just means that these people didn't fit into society's idea of what is normal. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with these people. It just means that they're doing something that is different than the norm. And that was like a revolutionary moment for me where I was like, wow, what a different way to think about trauma and healing and mental health.
It's so important, I think, to be thoughtful and critical of the DSM when we talk about it. I always try to share with people mental health diagnoses are not the same as medical diagnoses because there's not a blood test or a scan that you can get that can be yes, you have a major depressive disorder. You have generalized anxiety disorder. This is when you look like this, we call it this, And when you look like this, we can call it something different. It changes throughout time, all the time. And things that were in the DSM before, homosexuality was a mental illness in the DSM previously. It's very, it's created.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just something as simple as ADHD. It used to just be ADD, right? Mm-hmm. The DSM didn't have these sub-classifications. And it was just, when I was a child, I would have never been diagnosed with ADD because I didn't have that. I was more of the ADHD. I was very good at masking, shockingly. And so I think it's interesting that you said that even the DSM kind of is flexible. It's like an umbrella. You fall under this umbrella if you have these characteristics. And I think it is important to remember that a diagnosis is not a destination, right? It might just be a pit stop, right? And it's not permanent.
Yes. I love that.
For me, it provided a little bit of validity to the chaos that I was internally feeling at a time where I didn't know about the DSM or that there were revised versions or anything about that. And you don't have to, but you do know usually what's going on in your body. And when things don't feel quote unquote normal that someone else has decided is that external normal, it can feel scary. And so for me, having that validation from a licensed therapist and people who knew, okay, this is different from what you're used to. And here's the ways that we can help you decide what you do with that. Do you want to be back to quote unquote normal, or do you want to take what's happening here and build upon it and become something different and learn about it? And you get to direct what you do with whatever type of therapy you're engaged in. And I think those types of models, as opposed to here's your disorder, here's what we're going to do to fix it. And it's also going to include medication and making you as normal as possible so that everyone else around you can be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're kind of starting to move away with that. Is that what you've seen?
Yes. I mean, I just love that description of anyone who goes to a mental health professional. My hope is that you have the experience of them asking what you want out of treatment rather than suggesting, okay, we're going to fix you, quote unquote, or you're here to make this happen or get rid of this disorder, right? Because when it's patient-led or client-led treatment, then you get to decide what do I want my life to look like after this? I think especially when it comes to trauma and PTSD, there's often not a return to exactly who you were before that happened, right? It's I'm not ever going to be that person again. I'm not going to have to be this person who feels so overwhelmed and trapped in my house and in my body all the time either, right? But this next iteration of me isn't going to be a return to the before. It's sometimes I talk about capital B before, capital A after, my before and after.
That's how I've always viewed the assault in college. This was me before and this is me after.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I regard myself is also very different, which may be of my own volition, or it might be because that was the first time that I was engaged in therapy. I had no reason to go to therapy beforehand. Now here I am with a very valid reason that helps me to escape from the shame that I might have felt from peers or anyone else if I had just approached therapy on my own. And through that, it wasn't all just surrounding that trauma. Here's a whole lot of different things that I think I could work on that are separate and independent from what happened to me. I have loved that. I've been in therapy, and everyone that's listening probably knows this, but I started in 2006, just about a week after the sexual assault by a stranger who broke into my apartment, and have stuck it out even to now. Now, there's been times where I didn't go for a year or 2 years, and it's almost like a maintenance level. But over that amount of time, I have engaged in, really deep self-reflection and the ways that things that are external impact me and my impact on them, not bringing my traumas into my parenting and making sure that what I'm doing is in my best interest, for the impact that I'm wishing to have upon everyone else. And a huge piece of that has been EMDR. And I want to talk all about this, nerd out about it. For the longest time, I kept telling Kara how amazing it was. And I know her journey to finding, did you do 1 session, 2 sessions still?
I did 1.
Yeah.
And I was interested in it for a very, very long time. But unfortunately, it was not accessible for me monetarily. Insurance didn't cover it, anything like that. So I had to wait until I was at a point where I could afford it before I could actually access it. And so I had to utilize a lot of self-help. And it's basically somatic work that a therapist would have taught me, but I taught myself. So I learned a lot of somatic work before that. And I feel like I kind of did like the CBT portion of it on my own, like the pre EMDR stuff. But yeah, I only had 1 session. And my big symptom was just a tightness in my chest and actually in my throat. And I didn't realize it. And it resolved after 1 session. So mine was just bodily stuff remaining. So yeah.
I started mine after I was diagnosed with psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, which were directly related to PTSD. And I've been doing EMDR on and off ever since then. It works great for mapping future template, a lot of different things. I've used it in a lot of different scenarios. And those are also the coping skills that I use day-to-day life, whether it's breathing, focus, just some grounding practice. But I want to hear all about your experience finding EMDR, things that you've seen work, things that you haven't. Just geek out with us. Tell us all about it.
All right, let's do it. When I came to graduate school, I was like very deeply traumatized still, like very actively in that place. And, I had started therapy, but I always want to understand things. That's what always helps me. If I can really understand it, that's what I was looking for. So when I was in graduate school, I didn't know anything about mental health or therapy land. I was very much a baby in that space. And so I heard from professors and from other folks that EMDR was like one of the best types of treatment for PTSD. And so I started looking into it and I read The Body Keeps the Score and I got really curious. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to invest, let's do this. And I got trained while I was still in graduate school. So the way it works, when you're a therapist, you go to grad school and then when you graduate, you start kind of your residency is a way to think about it. And you do all these hours to become fully licensed. So I was trained before I even graduated because I just knew that's what I wanted to do. I have been using it ever since. I was 2017. I've been using it since in my practice and with clients. And it's so funny because whenever you introduce it to someone who hasn't heard of it, they're like, that sounds really weird. What are you talking about? It's very, very bizarre. Yep. And I'm like, okay, I know this sounds really weird, but would you be open to giving it a shot? Would you be down to try it? I often just find myself leaving a reprocessing session. So a session where we're looking at something like an old memory and just astounded with the shift that I see in folks. It's like their life gets to change. It's just why I keep coming back to it because the results that I've seen with the people I work with just make me feel very, very committed to learning more and getting better at this. Yeah, that being said, I know that EMDR isn't for everybody, right? And it's not the solution for every traumatized person, but I think you can use techniques and have parts of it that are helpful for almost anyone.
In all fairness, even to those of us who have done it, we're like, I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
You describe it to someone, they're probably going to be like, well, that sounds weird. But even those of us who have done it, we're like, it's weird. I don't know how it works. So explain how it works for those of our listeners who may be like, what is EMDR? How does it work? Why might I be interested in it? So they can be like, well, that's weird.
Yeah. So now you guys can all be like, this is really weird, but be open, I encourage an open mind. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it is one way we can think about it as a memory reconsolidation therapy. So that means it's a therapy where we identify specific memories that we want to process, right? So if you have traumatic experiences, which I define as experiences that are overwhelming or where you're trapped during them, right? You can't access your fight and flight response. You're trapped within them and you're overwhelmed. That kind of memory actually gets stored in our brain differently than the memory of listening to this podcast or having this conversation. It gets stored in part of the brain that says it's still happening right now. And that's in part because your body's so overwhelmed and flooded with stress chemicals during the event that it interrupts the normal processing. But it's also in part a survival technique because your body's like, we cannot forget this because it was so dangerous and so bad that we have got to remember that it has happened, right? So in EMDR, we identify what those target memories are. And then your therapist will ask you a specific set of questions in a specific order that lights up different parts of your brain that are related to that memory. And then we do something, and this is the weird part. This is when we do something called bilateral stimulation, which is a fancy word for stimulating left side of the body and right side of the body rhythmically. So almost like one thing you can imagine is if you're playing a drum and you're like tapping back and forth on the drum with your hands, that's a form of bilateral stimulation because you're stimulating left, right, back and forth. We don't actually totally understand why this works, actually. We just know that it does. One of the theories is that when you do left-right stimulation, it kind of is similar to what happens during REM sleep. You know, like when you're dreaming and your eyes are going back and forth really fast, your brain is processing. So we think it might have something to do with that, or left brain, right brain lighting up and getting all engaged, right? These are theories. But then we do bilateral stimulation while you think about the memory, and then you just get really mindful. You get curious about what comes up. What are you noticing? Emotions, thoughts, images, body sensations. And then we just let your brain follow, take you, and you get to follow and see where it takes you.
I think that's the craziest part for me is following where my brain wants it to go and really relinquishing that control when you have been in a fight, flight, freeze, appease phase for so long can feel scary. So finding that right fit for you in therapy in a place where you can feel safe and give up some of that control, it's a huge process in trust. But once you do, I'm still flabbergasted by how intelligent our brains are in ways that we don't allow it to process because maybe it's not quote unquote normal. But when we let our brains do what they're supposed to do, it's wild to me. And the things that I will bring in with my memories that make me feel safe that nobody externally would ever think of, it's all taking place between my two ears. And what an amazing way to remember that we have this incredible strength and intelligence stored within us. It's your job not to fix us, but to remind us that it's there. We just have to know how to use it.
Yeah. And like one of the things that we will sometimes say as EMDR therapists is if your bone breaks, you go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't heal your bone. The doctor creates an environment where your bone can heal itself. And we do that in EMDR therapy. Your brain actually is very, very good at this. Your brain's constantly helping you get over hard things and like deal with extreme situations and overwhelming things. And so we just create an environment where you can access your brain's power to do that. And it's just like, it's so freaking cool. So cool.
I love it so much. It's so great.
Yeah.
One of the things that you said that I love, and this is something that I refer back to time and time and time again, is people will hear my story or they'll hear Kim's story or they will hear any number of survivor stories and they will think, there's no way I could do that. And how did you do that? How did you survive that? And that's what I come back to. I'm like, there's nothing special that was within me that helped me to survive that situation that's not within every single person whose ears this is filling right now. That is something that is within us. It's just like we have this ability to heal. We all have this ability to survive. Sometimes we just get stuck in that traumatized state because one of the things that I've heard you say and that Kim and I say often is an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is perfectly normal. And that's what trauma is. So would you like to speak to that? Because I know you talk about it all the time. And I think it's such a healing thing to hear when you've been through something difficult.
Yeah. So the line I always say is like, you're having a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. The things that happen when we are traumatized actually make perfect sense once you understand kind of like the science behind our nervous system and the body and the brain and trauma. You're like, oh yeah, that's why I'm doing this. Oh, the reason I can't sleep is because my body doesn't want me to relax because my body's stuck in a defensive mechanism of fight, flight, or freeze constantly all the time, right? Oh, and it's doing that because it still thinks that I'm actively unsafe in this exact moment, even if part of me knows that it's over in the past. Another part of me is not aware of that. And I remember so clearly, I have this like clear memory of when I was first in graduate school and I was reading The Body Keeps the Score. I was sitting outside on our little patio and I was reading in this book, someone was describing me. I was like, oh my God, it's not just me. Oh, when the door slams, my whole body jumps every single time. This is what nightmares are like. And this is how I hold my body. And this is how I feel in different places. And reading that just made me realize, oh, it all makes sense that this is happening to me. It is not my fault that this is happening to me. This isn't something that's happening because I'm not trying hard enough to make it not happen. This is my body doing its best with what we have right now. And my body and my brain just like need more support, not to like snap into, get better and, get stronger or tougher or something like that. And it was like literally just such an important moment in my life to recognize it's not just me. This all makes sense. Many people have experienced exactly this. And there's actually lots of different ways to heal and recover. And you don't have to be like this forever.
Well, and I think one of the first things that people can take away from this too is granting yourself the grace just to be, just to sit in whatever it is that you've got going on that's filling your head, that you're fretting about, that you're worrying about. The biggest piece I had to let go of early on in therapy was comparing myself to who I was before, comparing myself to myself and comparing myself to others. I had to learn to be present. And you know what? Sometimes that really sucks because I might not like who I am at the moment. I might not like something that I did or how it's making me feel, but there's going to be a reason for it. Now, different from an excuse, right? We don't want to just build up our excuses and walk out and be like, I'm fine. See, gold star for the day in therapy. I really do want that gold star. Please give it to me. Please. But at the same time, like radical self-awareness, even when it feels like shit, is an act of self-love. And it impacts all the people around you too. So you see not just the client, but their entire structure and support system benefiting from this as well.
I think what you're describing is part of what we facilitate in EMDR therapy. Radical presence with what is in this moment, without judgment, just with curiosity. And it's actually very hard to do that. And so that's why I think bilateral stimulation, part of my theory is that bilateral stimulation helps us stay calm while we're accessing these really intense, disturbing things. And so we can look at it for the first time because previously we're just overwhelmed. So we're like, okay, I mean, EMDR doesn't feel good. Like it's not.
Just so you know.
Yeah, it's like it is very intense and exhausting, but it creates a space where you can actually do what you just described of, let me be present with this and accept it for what's happening right now, even if I wish it were different, because that's actually the first step to changing.
We are so thankful for all of your support. We're also supported by Cured.
They are a supplement company that is changing the industry standard for how supplements are made. They are products that I use every day that have genuinely changed my life.
Kara, of course, is the one who introduced me to them, and I was a little hesitant at first, but I can say after using their products for the last couple of months, I'm hooked.
My favorites that I think everyone should try and will love are the Serenity, Zen, and Rise. Serenity gummies have ashwagandha, L-theanine, and CBD. They're going to help you to just relax, take the edge off at the end of a long day or whenever you need it. Zen is going to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and sleep soundly. Hallelujah. And Rise is going to give you sustained energy and focus without caffeine or without a crash.
I was really hesitant to try anything I view as a sleep aid, but I can say after incorporating Zen into my nighttime routine, I am getting such better sleep.
Yes. And for all of our listeners, you can use code KARA10. Go to curednutrition.com or go to the link in our show notes to take you straight to the website. We hope that you love it as much as we do.
Yeah. I give some tips about best ways to approach EMDR for somebody that's never been before, but I would love to hear yours. I mean, one of my biggest ones, schedule downtime afterwards. You will probably feel exhausted and it won't make sense to you. And it's not always immediately after. Sometimes it's the next day, but schedule that downtime just to lay on your couch, stare at the wall, drool on yourself. What would be some of your tips?
Oh my God, I love that one because I do the same. I always recommend, and this goes for EMDR therapy, but also like any therapy, especially if you're dealing with trauma, to have some sort of transition ritual after therapy that helps you feel like you're moving from this space into the next one. So that can be simple. Like some of my clients will take showers, right? I'm going to put on some music, I'm going to take a shower, and then that transitions me from this to the next thing. Other people will do a little bit of like movement or exercise or writing something down and closing it and putting it away. But having some sort of transition ritual, especially if you have stuff to do that day, because not everyone can. I was like, if you can take time off, do it, but that's not always possible. But some sort of transition ritual. I also encourage people to bring some sort of like comforting object with them to therapy. So sometimes we'll actually do some work prior to starting reprocessing, where we find something that's comforting and then pair that with a sense of being like calm and grounded. And then they'll have that with them if we need it. I also say like, tell people in your life that you're doing this, who support you, let people know so that they can kind of understand that you're going to be more almost like raw is maybe a word, right? Like a little more open and raw because you're doing really hard work. So that way they can show up for you. That's some of the stuff I tell people.
Kara, I want you to speak to this. I had the very cool opportunity to drive to and from therapy with Kara when she did hers for the first time. And so I had my own observations, but Kara, tell us about what that was like.
That was my first session after EMDR. I wasn't actually doing EMDR that session, but I feel like that first session after EMDR too is equally important because it was so raw with EMDR. It's kind of the most vulnerable. It's kind of like open heart surgery. I mean, honestly, it's like, crack me open. Here's my junk. Like, let's fix it. When I had my first session afterwards, my therapist and I generally do telehealth. And so I had the opportunity to be in Charleston where she's at, and I was driving Kim to the airport. I was really lucky that the events surrounding that were very neuroprotective for me. What I mean by that is I was with Kim. So she's like one of my favorite people in the world. She's like one of my safest people. I had just gotten a new car that was like my dream car. So driving my car that just makes me so happy, right? And going to Charleston, which is honestly, it's my favorite place to be. It's my favorite city. It's where I went to college. I got to do all of these things that made me feel safe and happy. And so I feel like that was very neuroprotective for me to go into this environment to then discuss what we had processed. Yeah, I feel like it wasn't jarring, if that makes sense. What did you notice, Kim?
Knowing that you had been working on this and had been a long time coming, this was also on the heels of Kara's movie premiering.
Oh, yeah. So we can
also that little nugget. That's where I thought
casual.
That's why Kim was here. Yeah.
No, totally a normal thing. But all of her friends, family are all gathered in this space where usually she would be like, I'm crawling out of my skin. So she did something completely out of the ordinary. And then on the way back,
totally out of my comfort zone.
Exactly. But having therapy scheduled for right afterwards was actually a really good thing. Going in, it was like, okay, I've got to stop and do this. And, you run it almost as an errand. And coming out, she was just like, I feel like you were walking on your tiptoes and just let your hair out in the breeze. And it was like a palpable weight was lifted off of her. And to see the difference that a session like that can make when you have a safe space to unload that is great. I would also like to point out, not every session is like that. There's plenty that I come out of and I'm just like, I'm going to drive home all angry and I'm going to get in the bed and go in my head. And that's okay too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's just, all right, check that off the list. I'm done for the day. But I really try to be very present in that session as much as possible. And if nothing else, that's a really good thing that you can practice at home is that presence, but make sure that you are safe and protected. And it just goes back to what you've said. Have people in your life that know that you're doing this, that are going to be supportive of you, because it's not always going to be pretty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's kind of important for it not to always be pretty, right? Like It's important for you to be angry and it's important for you to be grieving because you have really valid reasons to be angry and grieving. Mm-hmm. And those are sometimes messy emotions.
One of the things that Kara talked about with access that I always want to come back to is that every state, if you are listening to this in the United States, every state has some form of victims compensation program. If you are the victim of a crime, it does not mean that the perpetrator has to be caught, just that the crime was reported, and that automatically triggers your victim rights amendment. And there is some sort of victims compensation fund set aside for emergency services and mental health counseling. And it's not just you, it's also secondary victims or people that are very closely related to the victimization. Your therapist, when they know what they are doing, can write this out for years and years, depending on what you decide together is your treatment plan. Let them take care of that. That's why you guys, it can't be a favorite part, but at the same time, you know how to write these things. You know what to do with them. Check ahead of time, see if it's something that they accept, because if you can work with victims compensation, it can get you on that path even quicker. I would never have been able to afford therapy or to go to those things without the victims compensation program that thankfully my victim advocates from the police department came to my parents' house house and sat and went line by line with that paperwork in the couple of days afterwards. I don't really remember that at all. But for me to be able to get in that quickly and not have to worry about the financial piece is just one more way that we can support survivors on that path to healing. And that's something that you all can do in the professional helping capacity, is to help us reintegrate with the paperwork side, because that can be daunting.
I have absolutely loved working with that program. They make it really quite easy for us. And it's just like really nice to be able to provide services to folks who wouldn't be able to afford it. And you know that you're really meeting with someone who has like such a strong need.
Yes.
So that's such an important reminder.
Yep. So sometimes there are time constraints as far as if it wasn't reported or if it's been a certain number of years. Sometimes there are time constraints on the victim's assistance funding type things. And if that's the case for you, where you're falling outside of those time constraints for your local jurisdiction or what's available to you, look for nonprofits, because usually there are also nonprofits. So local to me, there's 3 that I know of that provide therapy, and that's usually free of charge. And at this point, most of those agencies will have someone who has the more advanced trauma training in EMDR, because EMDR is a lot more mainstream now than it was even 5 years ago. So I encourage you to look at your local resources. And honestly, Google is an awesome tool for that. That's where I find most things these days. So.
Well, and another reason to have people in your life is if you are not in a mental state where you can Google that and waste your time on it, which I'm using my own words. I'm not going to waste my time looking for something new. I already started one. Why would I change therapists? Yada, yada, yada. Go down that line. You can have somebody that can do that simple Googling or filling out paperwork or help you stay on track. As I'm sure you know, trauma can mess with your brain in a lot of different ways. And that organization that comes with doing those administrative tasks that we already don't want to do can be really, really tough. So have somebody that can help you through that in whatever capacity. Even if you don't know what you're doing, having just a presence there can be a huge help.
Yeah. And I actually think that's one of the things that I sometimes will get asked from folks is like people who love trauma survivors. They're like, I don't know, like, what do I do? Like, how do I support them? I'm like, do paperwork for them. Like, help them find a therapist. You know, like set them up on the couch, like all cozy, somewhere where they can see you, and like do it for them. Because yeah, your attention, your focus, your organization can all go totally out the window.
Talk to us more about what are some things that people who love, because we have a lot of listeners who maybe if they themselves are not, quote, primary victims, that they definitely love and support those who are. What are some of your tips? What are things that you've seen work, not work, all of the things?
I also like this for anyone who's listening who may be like, people are asking me, how can they help me? I want a list of things to say, these are the ways that I can actually be helped. So whether you're a primary victim looking to give your friends, family members, loved ones a list of things that they can help with, or someone listening and you want to know how you can help the people you love.
Yeah. Oh, I love talking about this. Okay. So the first thing that I think is really, really helpful is just kind of like something I want people to keep in mind is to be reliable, engaged, and predictable. That might mean that you're reaching out around the same time on a day-to-day basis, or you have a routine that you all are following together, right? Because that reliability and that predictability are very, very helpful after a traumatic experience when everything is feeling very chaotic and unpredictable. Also being engaged, that doesn't mean you need to ask a ton of like probing questions about how the survivor's doing or what's happening or what they're feeling, but just being present with them with anything they want to share. And if they are comfortable, and oftentimes I'll ask, and check with them and see if it's okay. But if it's okay to have a little bit of like safe physical touch, even if that's like a handhold, sitting close to somebody, that might be too much too soon for some folks, but you can check in with that. Part of what we have to offer survivors is this thing called co-regulation. And that is when our body is calm and grounded, then that sends signals to the other person's body and brain that it might be safe right now to be a little more calm and a little more grounded. Because part of how our brain determines whether or not we're in a safe environment is by picking up cues from people around us, right? And it's always looking. And if our brain says, okay, so this person who I trust and care about and know is really calm right now, even in a subconscious level, that can help just to settle even a tiny bit. So that's why I also say like one of the really important things is to take excellent care of yourself and not to become like a martyr for your survivor that you love, because it actually doesn't help anybody when you're completely draining yourself in the service of somebody else. You need to make sure that you're getting enough sleep, that you are doing any movement that makes you feel good, eating enough, getting your own emotional support, because then you actually have that co-regulation to offer. I have other things of like little activities and stuff. Like,
keep them coming. We love it.
Okay, cool. I'm like, I can keep going. So one thing is, and you don't have to be like a particularly artistic person to do this, doing something creative with somebody else. That can be coloring pages. I've loved doing painting groups with folks. So we just put some like lo-fi on. I'm such a fan of like some lo-fi, and you paint. You're not like trying to create anything specific. You're just like picking colors that you like and like putting something onto this canvas in front of you. That helps to engage different parts of your brain. People often leave those experiences feeling much more calm and much more relaxed, which is most of the time what survivors want. They're like, I just want to feel like, because I'm on hyperdrive all the time and I just want to be more calm and more relaxed. So doing some creative stuff, crafting, making jewelry or bracelets or something like that, and listening to music. Walking is actually like a natural form of bilateral stimulation, which we talked about for EMDR. And so taking walks together, like movement and creative expression are two of the things that I just like turn to all the time, especially for folks who might not be in therapy yet or can't access therapy for some reason. If we can do something that's moving your body gently and something that's expressing stuff creatively, a lot of times those are very, very helpful in early days.
Sorry, I totally geek out over that. You know what's cool too is hearing these things. Maybe there are things that you've heard or you've read before. And how many times do you think you've got to come across them before one's going to click or one's going to stick out or the circumstances in your life are going to change and you're going to hear this again and be like, oh, maybe that's why I like doing that. So the thing that we have been doing this summer that I love and I want to do more of, friggin' chalk, just on our front. Yeah, we have a path that goes, by our house and we made an art walk. Was it a good art walk? Absolutely not. Was it art? Yup. We drew with chalk, whatever came into the kids' imaginations, and then it washed away the next day with the rain, and it was wonderful. But I find the same thing when I do puzzles, and that may be and Legos, building Legos is another one, but it's a type of bilateral stimulation where you are engaged and you're paying attention to something, but you're not completely out of body. You don't dissociate. And if you are thinking through things or having a conversation, maybe with somebody that you love or are trying to support, or you're trying to garner that support, whether or not you know it, those are great ways to have fun while you're doing it. I dare to say there have been times in therapy where I legitimately have fun. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people, especially kids. There's a lot of great fun ways that you can engage them in getting in touch with their emotions. So do you have any experience there to share?
Yes. So definitely with art projects, because I love doing art projects in therapy. It's so fun for me. I kind of like doing them myself. So I'm always like, yes, we get to do this today. I also, we joke around a lot in therapy. I'm very much like a welcomer of dark humor, because like that is, I think for so many survivors, one of the ways that they
tell us and you're welcome to our podcast.
Yes. I'm like so here for it because people have been coping with humor forever. And so I always make space for that. I don't like have a big, strong reaction. I'm like, yes, like let's make jokes. Let's laugh. I love song sharing in therapy too. Like, especially with teens, asking them to pick out a song that like really means a lot to them or they've been really loving. It doesn't have to be super meaningful. Sometimes it's just fun and we get to connect and like share it. But other times we have this really interesting conversation about what comes up for them around the music. Yeah, but I'm like very pro laughing in therapy, having fun in therapy, because we're definitely going to have those tough sessions. So that's definitely going to happen. So like we got to make space for like the lightness too.
I think that's especially true with kids because they're not going to want to keep repeating and going to doing something if it's not fun and engaging because they can't immediately see that feedback and the way that it's helping them, even though it is.
Most kids are not going to want to go and sit down and talk about their feelings, like
most adults don't either.
I mean, honestly, yeah, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. And I can't remember who told me this, but someone at some point was like, pick a therapist that is someone you want to talk to. So I'm pretty sure I've told this story on the podcast before and actually somewhat recently. But whenever I was picking someone, that was kind of in the back of my mind. And so honestly, I went on Psychology Today and I looked at people's profile photos and I was like, oh, that looks like somebody I would like to sit down and talk to. I mean, it was totally superficial, but that is how I started the process. And then I emailed a bunch of people. And then out of the people that responded, I was like, I like that response. Like who didn't annoy me? Yes. Basically,
yes.
I was like, that's the person I want to have therapy with. Like the person who doesn't annoy me. And so I think everyone kind of feels that way. So if, you're with a therapist and, something's rubbing you the wrong way, that might be a sign that you're not going to be comfortable enough with that person to go deep. You want to be able to have the fun. And I think that's so important to healing and remembering. And listen, there are enough therapists and there are enough people that need therapy that if you have therapy with one person and it's not a good fit, most people are not going to have their feelings hurt by that because there's a right person for every person.
I was going to say, Summer, can you give everyone permission to say that you're not judging them if they decide to stop therapy? That would be a great...
Yes. You have permission to leave therapy if your therapist is not the right match for you. We're not mad. Oftentimes, we feel it too. And, sometimes I think folks will come to therapy and feel like they don't want to upset us. They don't want to make us, they don't want to hurt our feelings. And so they might stay, or they might think, oh, this is just how it is. So they might keep staying, even though I can feel the vibe. I know you're feeling it. And yeah, oftentimes we're not shocked or surprised. We're yeah, honestly, that makes sense. Also, your therapist can help you find a different therapist. That's totally a thing. You can ask for help with that. You don't have to. It's not your comfort zone, but very, very normal. And the best therapy, and this isn't just me saying this, the research supports this too. The best therapy happens when you're working with someone who you like and who you trust. And so if you don't like and trust your therapist, get a new one.
They will not have their feelings hurt. They're not going to talk shit about you. No. It's completely okay. And it's part of their jobs. That is drilled into your heads. It's not as personal as you think that it is.
100%. You have permission.
Gold star, guys. Gold star.
Another thing that reminds me of is I get comments from people sometimes and they say, they don't want their therapist to judge them. And I think that's another really common thing that people are stopped in therapy by is this fear that their therapist is going to judge them for something they say or something they do or do not do. So can you go ahead and speak to the reality of that?
Yes. As a therapist, my job is to be curious. And if you're judgmental, you're not curious. That blocks curiosity, right? Curiosity is one of the most important traits a therapist can have because I can't assume that in filling blanks for you. I have to really understand your experience by being curious about it. I also think, and this is definitely a challenge situation for some folks, but if you can feel the bravery to do this, tell your therapist that. I'm going to share this thing with you. I'm really worried. But before I do, I'm really worried that you're going to judge me. I'm worried that there's going to be judgment. And sometimes getting meta with your therapist like that is actually so important because that's where we do some really interesting work of oh, I'm noticing there's a part of me that's worried that I'm going to be judged for sharing this. Oh, and then you can have a really interesting conversation and do some really interesting work around that before you even say the thing that you're worried about being judged for. But no, another thing to think about is we've heard so many things. We hear so many things. We're not judging you.
That was actually something that my therapist said to me once. She was people come in all the time and they say, you're not going to believe what I've been through. And she's try me. I've heard some pretty crazy stuff. You're probably not going to say anything that's going to surprise me. I've heard some stuff. So yeah, I think that's another important thing to remember. And I think it comes back to something we were talking about earlier. And it's why it is so important to tell these stories, because it reminds me of you saying, Summer, that you were sitting there reading The Body Keeps the Score and you were this is me. As often as we hear these stories or we hear our therapist say, you're not going to say anything that's going to surprise me, it reminds us that these are normal responses. Just because you haven't heard of someone who had the same response doesn't mean that there's not someone who had the same response. It just means you haven't heard the right person share their story yet, because the way you respond is there will be somebody else that responds similarly. So I think it's just so important to continue having these conversations. And I'm so glad that you've been here for this one.
Speaking of getting a little meta, where you are now today, what advice would you give you as a therapist starting out?
Don't you love these kind of questions? They're so hard.
I know. I'm thinking what would she want to, what would she need to hear? The advice I would give myself when I was just first starting out as a therapist is that it's not just okay to care about the people that you're working with. It's really important that you care about them. And I don't know, I'm just thinking so much about one of the things about this work is that you really do carry the clients that you've worked with you. I think about them all the time, even if we haven't worked together, even if we finished years ago, I still think about them. And I think when I was first starting, part of that was a little bit scary, but I think that that's one of the things that's made my work successful and in its own way, like sustainable, because, this work, it can be very heavy, this work, but getting to be with people who you really care about and like watch them grow and recover and heal, and then like go out into the world being this version of themselves they're so proud to be, caring about them makes it more sustainable. I think that's what I would say to her.
So let's go one step deeper. What would you as a therapist now say to you as a young person, not as going to be a therapist, but just you?
What you're experiencing is so normal and it's not your fault that it's happening. It's okay to feel that feeling of being lost and uncertain and not knowing what the future is going to hold. That's a stage that you're in. This is your era right now. It's not where you're going to be forever. And it's okay and important to be there while you're there. I now look at you with so much respect and like reverence and gratitude for everything that you had to experience. And, you're the one who got us here. And just like that gratitude towards her, I think is a big feeling.
That's going to be so healing for people to listen to, which is why I asked. And just what a wonderful gift, not that you're just giving yourself, but everyone that you come in contact with. I can't thank you enough for being here and sharing so many vulnerable, but this is what Kara and I love, is these are things that people can start doing right now, whether or not they're actually seeing a licensed therapist or if they're working on things on their own, or just ways to navigate and find their fit and their way to take care of their own mental health, because it's all interconnected and so important, especially for trauma survivors.
Yes. And this community of like survivors just really has my heart. I know that I'm in the right place for me, that I get to do this support. And like, thank you guys for doing this work too. And just like helping to make these conversations happen and more accessible to people. Because like you said, if you don't know that other people have experienced this, you feel so crazy and messed up. And then you realize like, oh, actually, like this is really my body and brain trying to keep me safe, So thank you for doing this and for having me.
Yeah. Or you could just be like Kim and I and be like, I'm fine. What? I'm fine.
Also an option. Your friends and family be like, are you?
I'm not impacted by that trauma. People don't know what you're talking about.
We always make sure to have a call to action. What would your call to action for our listeners be?
Yeah, well, so I have a couple of things online that are available for folks on demand. So I have like 3 different courses that I offer. One is about building healthy relationships after trauma. One is soothing the body after trauma. And that's where you're going to get tons of those somatic skills. And the other one is about supporting survivors. So it's all for folks who love survivors and who want to understand how to create an environment for them in their home or their classroom if you're a teacher, stuff like that. So those are the things I have on demand. If you're in California and you might want to work with me, I tend to be pretty full, but you can get on my wait list. I have group therapy and individual therapy. And that's all at my website, summerforlenza.com.
And you are very active on social media as well. That's how I found you.
Yes.
So give us your social media handle.
Also at Summer Forlenza, that's me. I'm taking a little break for the summer right now. So she's offline at the moment, offline and thriving, but coming back in the fall probably. But there's tons and tons of stuff on there. I was making daily content for probably about 2 years. So lots and lots and lots of resources there as well.
Excellent. And I love that these are all things that are backed not only by your degrees, but also your experience, your license. This is tangible, real, qualified information that you can go to and get. And you know that what you're experiencing and going through and learning is going to be backed with that accreditation. So thank you for putting that out there and sharing it and opening yourself up. And again, folks, if it's not Summer that you're trying to get on a wait list for, there are a lot of different resources to find someone local to you. There's a lot of different funding sources. Grab a friend, sit down, have that space where both of you can go through and find what will be the best fit, whether it's with insurance, victims comp, or something else.
Yes. Yeah, ask for help with that because it's okay to feel overwhelmed by the process.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
It is.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners? I know that they are going to enjoy this episode as much as we've enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, any other magical wisdom to impart?
I don't think I got any magical wisdom, but keep going. It gets better. Even if it feels a bit worse at first, a lot of people have a lot of like beautiful recovery stories, and like you can be in that as well. And where you are now is not where you will be in a year, in 5 years, in 10. So keep going. You got this.
I love it. Thank you so, so much for joining us and for your time. And everyone, go check out Summer's website, her social media, and give us feedback on this. Let us know what you thought. And hopefully someone really felt seen and healed and inspired by this episode. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you.
Thank you.
Survivor's Guide to True Crime is hosted and executive produced by Kimberly Corbin Rourke and Kara Robinson Chamberlain. If you love what we do here, please don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show in your podcast player. It's an easy and free way to help us and help more people find the show. To learn more about the guests featured or to find resources and information discussed on the show, visit survivorsguidetotruecrime.com. Thanks for listening. Well, see you later. Oh, I am... What? Who does that?